What's up, guys? Welcome back to Captain Mike's rigging station. Let's talk about jig selection. Okay, jigging. It's such a hot topic right now. It really is. Over the last decade or so, slow pitch jigging has just emerged as the hottest tactic of the century. Okay, it really has. And it's given us the ability to target a variety of different fish in different depths and venues that we've never been able to reach before. And we've never been able to do it so effectively as now with the advent and continued advancement of tackle. Both terminal tackle with diamond braid as an example. What an absolute game changer, right, to the jigging industry. Diamond braid, without it, forget it, okay? Rods, carbon fiber, all sorts of, bulletproof, space-aged, unbreakable materials that are incredibly light, but incredibly sensitive, but also incredibly strong. So couple all of that with these awesome high-speed jigging reels that have a lot of line capacity, lightweight, auto-engage, smooth drag, it just goes on, the features. And combined, it's really putting a weapon in our hands, a tool in our hands that is unlike anything we've ever fished with before. And there's no end in sight. This tackle, specialized jigging tackle, is continuing to advance in leaps and bounds. You haven't seen anything yet. I'm telling you, this stuff has a long way to go before it reaches peak performance. And already, it's incredible, so I can't wait to see what the future holds. Jig selection is a big part of that, right? I mean, there are so many jigs out there, it's crazy. I mean, how do you pick what jig to fish and when and why? So I wanted to kind of just share with you my point of view on jig selection and, a little history on jig fishing itself, how we are where we are, how we got to where we are, and how I look at jig selection. So keep in mind, I've been jig fishing for many, many years. It all started with that right there. That is what we've nicknamed Goldilocks, okay? But it's basically a 10-ounce gold hammered diamond jig. That's what that is right there. And it is perhaps one of the deadliest lures ever created. This has been around for probably as long as I've been alive. And this is where my jigging career started, with this particular lure right here. Fishing the Hudson Canyon, Linden Cole Canyon, all of these deep water trenches off of New England for big-eyed tunas, yellowfin tuna, longfin tuna, they would all clobber this jig. And basically what you did is you flipped it out away from the boat and you let it drop to a guesstimated depth. If we see a thermocline at 100 feet, readings at 200 feet, whatever it may be, you're trying to get your jig into the strike zone. So you guesstimated how long that was. Some guys even marked their line to try and be a little bit more precise. And all you did was kind of yo-yo. You kind of just bounced that jig up and down. And if you ask me, you're mimicking a squid. That's what it looks like. And of course, those tuna species thrive on squid. So it makes perfect sense that that was such a killer lure. And even till today, it's incredibly effective. I tell people, look, if you're not sure what jig to fish, just fish a hammer diamond jig, okay? Interestingly, the same jig here in South Florida, in the Florida Keys, is a grouper killer. So not only is it incredibly effective for pelagic species higher in the water column, but bounced along the bottom, red groupers, man, they love this thing. And again, I think it's because it mimics a squid right on the bottom, and they love squid. It's an easy meal, delicious, primary food source. So once again, that makes perfect sense. And I think that jig will be with me forever, and I think I'll fish it forever. Then, slow pitch jigs really started to enter the arena, I don't know, 10, 14 years ago, somewhere in that, range. And it was very, very hard to get these unique shaped and styled jigs. When I first got into slow pitch jigging, nobody had even heard the name slow pitch jigging. There were literally like two guys who even know anything about it, okay? Benny Ortiz, who today is leading the slow pitch jigging push, so to speak, was one of those guys. I remember speaking with him when this really just first came out. But it was very, very challenging to get these jigs. I used to have to get them from Malta in the Mediterranean. I'm in South Florida. I gotta buy fishing tackle from the Mediterranean. But truth be told, that's where we got these high-end seafloor control jigs, okay? 50 bucks, 70 bucks, and that was 14 years ago. That's an expensive jig to buy. And there were so many of them, so many different shapes and styles, and you obviously wanted to get as many as you could in your hands because it was such an exciting tactic, and you wanted to fish all of these different style jigs and really see what was incredibly effective, you know, and just continue to learn. It was just so passionate. It was like fire. Just give me more and more and more and more about this whole technique. A technique that was invented in Asia, you know, being able to target less pressured fisheries in deeper water because everything shallower was just beat the heck. And that's really where it got its start, you know, and where still today it's incredibly popular, where all of the, you know, jigs come from, for the most part, is Asia. But again, it was very hard to get jigs, and you would lose them, right? Because we were just learning how much pressure can I put on this tackle, how much heat, how much drag, you know, what can this do? So it was a lot of experimenting, a lot of fine tuning, a lot of getting dialed in. And that meant losing a lot of jigs. We also quickly realized that not only do bottom fish eat these jigs, groupers, snappers, but everything eats the jigs, including fish with teeth, notably king mackerel. That means, you know, you could expect to donate a few of these to kingfish on almost every trip. Wahoo, sharks, barracudas, anything with teeth eats wounded fish, and that's what you're mimicking. You're mimicking wounded prey, escaping prey. You're not fishing a piece of metal. Don't look at it like it's a piece of metal. It's alive, it's magic. In your hands, you've got to bring that piece of metal to life. And when you do, fish are fooled. They believe that it's an easy meal. Okay, so all fish eat the jigs. And again, it was a learning curve of how do I stop losing these, or how do I, you know, stop spending a fortune on jigs that I'm losing. Ultimately, as I got deeper into the jigging game, I ultimately decided to launch what I considered was, and perhaps still is, one of the best pieces of tackle out there, and that was the 6-pack of jigs. I took 3 different jig styles, and each in 2 different sizes. So those 6 variations put a tool in your hand for nearly every application that you could encounter here in Florida and beyond. And it eliminated so much confusion because now you didn't have to pick from hundreds of SKUs in different sizes. Now it was just a matter of, what am I fishing, A, B, or C? That's it. And they're all interchangeable, they all worked. That was the 6-pack of jigs. I introduced that when I owned Florida Sport Fishing Magazine, and we sold thousands and thousands of those 6-packs. I think they still sell it to new owners of the magazine, not certain. And I kind of laugh about it today. I still look back and think about it because you got like kind of 2 kinds of anglers out there today. You got the jig fishermen who want to catch fish, right? And want to keep it kind of easier maybe. So something like that 6-pack of jigs, or, you know, a highly recommended jig, it's an easy decision and it keeps you hooked up, keeps you in the game. You've got other guys. I got a buddy, I'm sure you're going to watch this. His name's Derek. This guy's a fanatic. Let me tell you something. I've seen some fanatics in my life. You've never seen a fanatic like this cat. Okay, you want to talk about a jig fisherman? This guy's got jigs like this running through his veins, okay? And if you look at his jig collection, his arsenal of jigs, you need a separate truck, a dually, Super Duty 650 or whatever, just to carry his jigs to wherever it is that he's fishing. Incredibly selective, a jig for every occasion, a jig that does everything, and he knows them all like the back of his hand. I think he has every one of them named. Okay, he also has like the best of, where those fish have caught personal best of something or another, so they're not to be fished. Crazy stuff with this cat. But nevertheless, that's the extreme, right? That's the upper echelon. That's the really hardcore jig fisherman that wants to have all of that. But like I said, it doesn't need to be that way. You can just have a few jigs. That's okay too, and still be incredibly effective. You just have to understand what jigs and what they do and why. And that's what we're gonna talk about real quick here. So remember this, look, when you've got a jig with a very big face, a lot of surface area right there, okay, a lot of surface area, it's gonna catch a lot of water. This is common sense. Just start thinking about this in common sense terms. Look at all of the area. Look at all of the square footage on this jig. Obviously, it's gonna catch a lot of the current, a lot of the moving water. It's gonna require you to fish a heavier jig in certainly deeper water to keep that jig in the strike zone on or near the bottom if you're targeting bottom fish. So in high current conditions, a leaf-shaped jig is not appropriate. Okay, here's another example. This is a leaf shape that has an indentation right there. It catches a lot of water. It's very wide. Okay, here's two different examples right there of jigs that are best suited for low current conditions. Okay, low current conditions is when you want a fat, stubby, wide jig with a lot of surface area. You'll get tremendous action out of that jig. But if you have a lot of current, a lot of moving water, it's gonna sweep the jig away from the bottom and up off the bottom, and you're gonna lose that vertical presentation that's so important for achieving maximum action and pitch on these specially designed jigs, okay? And understand this, look, this isn't just somebody molding a piece of clay. Tremendous amount of testing and all sorts of computer programs, real world scenarios have gone into this shape to be sure that you get maximum action. But once again, it's designed for a very special purpose, a lot of current. Here's a jig that has evolved to have a lot of different surface areas, okay? There's little indentations, hard to see there, but I love that jig right there. I think that's called the Enforcer, and it just absolutely mimics a squid so well. It's thin and long, so it's a great jig to fish in deep water, but it has some surface area around the belly, but because of all of these different shapes and indentations, there's almost like a star pattern in there. It wobbles and falls and swims like crazy, incredibly enticing, really, really enticing. So if I have some current and I'm fishing some deep water, it would make a lot more sense to fish something like that than to fish something like that. Okay, it just makes more sense, right? All of this is common sense. Start looking at it that way. Here's another example of a long knife-shaped jig. Also three-sided, has an oval side here, has two sides here, and that's gonna give that jig tremendous wobble. It's gonna fall horizontally, okay? When you pitch it off to the side and it falls, it's gonna swim and fall horizontally. And that's what really makes that jig so appealing to so many different species. Probably perfectly mimics a ballyhoo, needlefish, even a flyer, you know, something long and slender, small mackerel, anything like that. Absolutely deadly. Once again, long, slender, little surface area, ideal for deep water, high current situations. The size of the jig can vary, but we're talking about shape. That's the shape that you want to look at when you're fishing deep water and there's a lot of moving water, okay? And remember, just as a tip, go down in class in that braid, all right? If you're fishing deep water, fish 20-pound braid. If there's a lot of current, some guys will even scale down from there. If there's not a lot of current and it's not so deep, you can get away with 30-pound braid, even 40-pound diamond braid. But as a rule, scale down your terminal tackle, the deeper it gets and the more current that you're facing. And it's about balance. That's the greatest thing about slow pitch jigging. It's all about balance and trying to really fine tune the entire system, the entire setup. Other jigs are kind of in the middle. Look at this one. Also somewhat leaf shaped, but very slender, very thin, has some indentations in the body that reduce the drag on that lure when it's moving through the water, when it's pitching off to the side, and just increases its action. So has always been one of my favorite style jigs as well. I think that's just universally appealing to fish everywhere because it just perfectly mimics a bait fish of this size, which is very prevalent. It's flashy, has some glow. The two key features to any jig is it has to have some flash, and certainly I prefer, there's glow on there. There's a glow stripe right on that lure. You've got glow on the entire back. You can start to see the pattern here, right? There's a lot of glows. Here's another jig that's very similar to this one, just a little more slender, okay? Just a little more slender. I'll tell you what, that's a blackfin tuna killer right there. If you had to pick one jig for blackfin tuna, that would be it, right there, okay? Sardine shaped, 4 or 5 inches, 6 inches, whatever that is, 5 or 6 inches. Flashy, deadly, has a life of its own. You don't even need to move it very much. So if you only had one jig, it would probably be this one. Can handle almost every scenario or situation. Look, at the end of the day, you don't need 100 jigs. You don't, you just need a few. But you need a few for different scenarios, different venues, excuse me, different depths, different current. You have to be well prepared. But it shouldn't be random. You shouldn't open up your jig bag or your tackle bag and just randomly pick a jig and say, hey, shoot, let's give this a shot. Look at the jig. Think about it. Think about the venue that you're fishing and how that jig is gonna perform in those conditions based on the tackle that you're using. All right, consider the entire system because that's what it is. And there really are no wrong decisions. That's the coolest thing about this because they all catch fish. And you'll learn very quickly by experimenting which is the better option in those conditions. And when all else fails, go back to Goldilocks because that right there will keep you hooked up, I promise you that. Guys, appreciate you watching. Make sure you catch every segment of Captain Mike's rigging station here in the shop, out on the dock, out on the water, digest it all right? You're gonna take a little bit away from everything. You're gonna be a more successful angler. Remember, okay, nearly 700 additional videos on Florida Sport Fishing TV Plus. Spend the time, do the work. You'll get out of it what you put into it. And look, here's a final thought I wanted to remind you. I don't care where you are. If you're excited about jig fishing and you want to get into it, maybe it's a good idea to charter a boat, right? There's all sorts of charters. A great booking service is fishingbooker.com. There's all sorts of filters. You can pick guys who are in your area, other areas, guys who specialize in jig fishing, and tell them that you want to learn, and maybe they'll take you out there and give you a few pointers. But look for those guys, like I said, on fishingbooker.com. But be straight with them right out of the gate. Let them know what your intentions are, okay? That you want to fine tune your tactics and you really want to learn more about jig fishing. It's an exciting approach. More importantly, it's deadly effective. I'll see you out there.